That's you got it now, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, so what we're going through today, as before, we'll just give you a bit of a recap on workshop 2, and then the theme of today's workshop is about visitor consumer expectations, trends, and we're going to hear from Jim Eccleston from 56 Degree Insights, and fingers crossed from Peter Syme from Adventure Specialist from 1,000 Mile Journeys, etc. So I'm just going to give him a buzz, make sure he's coming on board. And then we're going to move on to just a session on trying to pull the whole of these 3 sessions together, because what we've had is, this is workshop 1, session 3, which would have been delivered over a full day's workshop, but it's been stretched over sort of 6 weeks. So we're just going to try and pull that together, and some of the key findings that we've had on the research side of things, to actually just a few thoughts and a helicopter view of where Scotland's key markets are, specifically on the UK. Then Fergus will give you a wee bit on the business improvement planning, and then it's close of workshop. And again, we should all be dyed and dusted by 4 o'clock. So the takeaways from workshop 2, sorry, I was just getting confused which screen I'm looking at there. We heard all around, and there is that evidence coming out that the market's still subdued, and it'll be March 21 before the domestic market returns in confidence come April time. Highlands is well positioned, third most popular destination, and there are great opportunities for collaboration out there by building authentic experiences. And it's not just collaborating with like-minded businesses on adventure tourism, but what we're actually looking at is the opportunity of working with accommodation providers, transport operators, or food and drink operators. Key for the customer is ease of booking, and that's ease of booking and being able to seamlessly get their booking online, because the lead-in time now is seeming to be a lot shorter, but also that they're looking for some confidence in terms of terms and conditions, and also making sure that everyone's become COVID compliant. Albeit we've got the vaccine coming on stream, they're still going to be looking for these. And the key message coming across is it's about digital, it's get social all the time. Our speakers for today are Jim Eccleston from 50 Degree Insights. Jim and Duncan Stewart set up 56 Degree Insights. Both have got extensive experience in research fields, and especially in consumer research. And Jim and Duncan put together off their own bats some research, consumer research about through COVID. And Jim's going to be giving us update and feedback on that and his views. And then we're going to be joined by Peter Syme, and Peter's just going to give us his experiences of where adventure tourism is, and his discussions with over 200 tourism operators, adventure tourism operators across the world. That's if I get a hold of them, I hope. So really, same format as before. We'll let each of the speakers present, and then use the Q&A feature to use the chat feature to throw up any questions, and then we can have a discussion and a chat after that. Take a 5-minute break, and then we'll move on to the next session. So Jim, if you're about ready to go.
Yep, I am indeed.
Go from there, and I'm going to go and try and make a phone call.
Okay, thank you, Stuart. I'm going to try and share my screen now, so hopefully that works as well. Let me see. Desktop to share. Hopefully everybody can see my screen.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can. Is that okay? Good. Excellent. Thank you, Stuart. I've got about 20 minutes to talk you through something that I could spend 4 hours on, so I'll do my best to run through it quickly. Some of you may have seen some of our findings already from our Scottish Tourism Index, which we ran during the summer months. What I'm going to try to do today is bring together some of the key findings from across the period and how it is relevant to the Scottish tourism industry, and in particular to the Highlands and obviously to the adventure tourism market. It's going to be more of a scene setting around tourism and how people are feeling, how Scots are feeling about tourism. And hopefully Peter will then be coming on to talk more about adventure tourism and what it means going forward. So it's kind of scene setting. It's based on research undertaken between May and August. And I'll just go on to the next slide. this one here, just move this slide, move that out of the way. First of all, we ran 4 waves of the research. We were conscious there wasn't a lot of information out there during the first lockdown about how people were feeling about tourism, especially the Scottish market. So we decided to set up our own survey. We interviewed 500 people in the beginning of May and repeated that survey early June, the week before tourism reopened, around about the 7th of June, before it reopened on the 15th. And then we also ran a survey at the end of August to look back on the main part of the summer season and just how that had been, all through the eyes of Scots. So all the percentages I'm going to show you are based on percentage of Scots residents. It's a representative sample of the Scottish resident population. Basically we interviewed 500 or thereabouts each time. So we've got an overall sample of around 2,000 Scots, all weighted to be representative of the Scottish population. And the fieldwork was run by Populous Data Solutions, who are a very robust and solid company who are able to provide that sample for us. And we designed a questionnaire. We got them to basically host the questions online, deliver the sample to us, and we did all the analysis basically. So in the time available, there's no way I can cover everything. This slide, which I'm not going to put up for long, but it gives you an illustration of the range of topics that we covered within the survey over the 4 waves of research. All of it is available to download on our website. So don't worry about taking down any notes or whatever. You can, my final slide has got a link to our website, and you can download all 4 reports and various other bits and pieces from the survey in there as well. So hopefully a useful resource for you. I mean, it's all based on how people were feeling over the summer months, but it's all obviously still very relevant given where we are in the pandemic. So I'm going to talk you through some of the key findings that we found, how Scots were feeling. And we began in May by asking them, how did they feel about travel generally at that stage? About holidays. What were their views? Now, bear in mind, they were very much in full lockdown. It was before any of the releasing of restrictions. What we discovered is that on the left-hand side of the chart, around about 1 in 10 Scots, 1 in 9 Scots were simply, they were scared, they were nervous about travel, they were feeling very wary, and we got some quotes there that illustrate that. The uncertainty of the pandemic, the desire to stay at home. Big chunk of the population, no interest at all in the idea of traveling at that stage. On the other side of the coin, we had around 17% of the population tended to be younger, tended to be young independents and so on, who said, well, yeah, we can't do anything at the moment, but nothing's really changed. I expect to continue my usual travel behaviours as before when we're allowed to do so again. But of course, there's a big chunk in between these two extremes who expected at that time that they would be travelling again in the future, travelling being domestic and international, but with additional caution, planning, and a number of changes. So there was very early on, we saw changes in people's mindsets and potential behaviours around tourism activity, caution around the virus, around transmissions, around cleanliness and hygiene, all these sorts of things, and things like the thoughts of going in airplanes and so on were far from people's minds at that time, and in many cases still are. Now, when we did the final wave of the current set of surveys for the Scottish Tourism Index at the end of August, we revisited this question and asked, well, okay, we've been through full lockdown, we've now opened up to a certain extent, and this was before there were any obvious signs of wave 2 coming along. How do you feel now about travel generally? And what we found, we asked this in a slightly different way, but we're still able to compare the results to a certain extent. Mindsets hadn't changed hugely. A lot of people were still extremely nervous about the idea of traveling anywhere. So on the left-hand side of the chart, a quarter of Scots said they wouldn't consider traveling to any destination just now, end of August, either at home or abroad. Then you had a fairly big chunk, a third of the population said they would only consider a holiday or break in Scotland at the moment. They would avoid trips to other parts of the UK or overseas. And a similar proportion said there would be some impact for them. They wouldn't want to travel too far for holidays, maybe other parts of Britain as well as Scotland, but not overseas. And then you had 11% who were a bit more laissez-faire and would consider a holiday anywhere as soon as they were able to do so. And some had already done that. So what you can see here is still a lot of reticence, even when tourism had, to a certain extent, reopened again in late August around the whole idea of travel. And it varied by different segments of the population. Empty nesters were much more affected by the impacts of COVID in terms of travel than pre-nesters or in families. Pre-nesters and families were both at a similar sort of level of feeling about it. Still a lot of nervousness, but not as much as amongst empty nesters. So obviously, empty nesters by definition tend to be older, 55 plus, slightly more likely to be seriously affected if they are infected, obviously. So more nervousness. Also, there was a financial impact in here, and we'll come on to that in a couple of slides' time. C2DEs, the lower socioeconomic groupings, more likely to be extremely impacted and unlikely to travel anywhere at the moment than ABC1s. And a lot of that was down to finances, as we'll see. I'll just move on to the next slide. We asked people in June and July about how they felt about specific aspects of holidays and travel to any destination, not necessarily within Scotland here, to any destination. And very clear for us then was in June that safety and hygiene was uppermost in their minds, avoiding places with no hygiene guarantees. And obviously the schemes which the likes of Visit Scotland and the other national tourist boards brought in place around Good to Go and so on did help in that respect. But there was also a lot of concerns around travel generally. In June, 68% unwilling to travel by air. Cruise holidays not on many people's agenda at all in the near future, 85% avoiding that. And at that stage, quite a large proportion unwilling to use public transport. That percentage has definitely come down as we've started using public transport for more everyday life things anyway over the last few months, and the requirement for face coverings and so on. But the main concerns were around overseas travel. And interestingly, in June, that was when the quarantine rules came in, the 14-day quarantine, before the exemptions. And 89% of people said they would reject the idea of any overseas travel because of the quarantine rules. There's no way they were going to spend 14 days at the end of their holiday. They would have to take too much time off work. And in terms of where they would go, especially further afield, longer haul destinations, less interest. In July, we developed these questions a bit, and we found that by that stage, air bridges, and the idea of some destinations being exempt had been introduced. You'll remember there'd been a lot of hoo-ha within the industry and within the general public generally about not having to quarantine. Well, actually, what we discovered was it only really turned 17% of that 89% who were unwilling to consider overseas travel, only really made them reconsider. So the vast majority is still not considering air travel, even with air bridges. And again, air travel concerns for a holiday or break during 2020, 4 in 5 Scots unlikely to do so. And the beach images that many of us saw back in May from the crowded beaches in parts of the south of England, I mean, Durdle Door is shown in that little image there, put a lot of Scots off the idea of going anywhere south of the border. Certainly for a beach holiday, 87% would avoid it. But the two key things that have come throughout all the waves of the research that have been constant barriers, if you like, to travel, or constant things which are impacting on people's travel decisions, relate to financial circumstances and on the potential for air travel. So on the left-hand side of this chart, we found in August that 35% of Scots had been impacted significantly by the current COVID-19 restrictions. Now, it was up to them to define what they meant by significantly, but clearly a significant impact. They might have been on furlough, they might have lost their job, there might have been other reductions in finance coming into the household and so on. And that figure had gone up in August from what it had been in May and June at 33% each month. And obviously things have moved on since then. We haven't gone back out to find out how people will feel now, but I would guess it's probably a little bit higher than that now. Air travel, and this is interesting. We'd asked the questions about traveling by air in 2020 in June, and 68% said they were unwilling. And in July, 78% said they were unlikely to travel by air for a holiday this year. We asked them in August, well, what about next year, 2021? How likely are you to consider traveling by air for a holiday? And 60% of Scots said they were unlikely to do so. 60% agreed they were unlikely to consider traveling by air for a holiday or break next year. So that's where there is some hope for the domestic tourism industry for next year, and that a lot of the home holiday markets are still going to be there, they're still going to be buoyant. And we'll see that in my final slide in this presentation, actually. So turning to holidays in Scotland, we asked them, people in, I think this was in July, yeah, just before tourism reopened, what were the key factors that they had in mind when planning or choosing a Scottish holiday this year? And the main things that came through were around safety, 17%, a location that was easy to get to, so a desire not to go too far from home, 16%. We'd all become familiar with the R number and all the other measures of the virus and transmission over the previous months, and 15% said they would avoid places where the R number was high. Somewhere quiet, away from crowds, the idea of getting away from people, 15%. But price and affordability and value for money were also really important. They always are for domestic, for any kind of holiday, but clearly at the moment, even more so. And the desire to find self-contained accommodation where there was less other contact with other people, etc., 10%. And we asked them in both June and July, well, what sorts of issues were concerning them and which were important to be addressed if they took a holiday in Scotland this year. And so this was before tourism reopened. The encouraging news at that point was that a lot of people recognised things might not be ready for the summer fully, so they would consider a holiday in the autumn or winter. 82% would go off the beaten track, so a desire, a feeling that they would go beyond the normal tourism hotspots. 68% would wanted to support Scottish tourism, so a desire to support each other, and 96% would respect local communities. There was a big fear amongst a lot of communities about tourists coming in from other parts of the country into the area. From a tourism perspective, there was a feeling that they would respect these local communities. And we'll come on to the community angle in a few moments. In July, we asked a couple of other questions, which were also important and will have had an impact on the success of tourism during the period. Just under 2/3 would only visit an area if most places were open, or if they believed that most places were open. They want to still have a full tourism experience. And 80% would only visit places approved for hygiene. So again, that fear around cleanliness and hygiene is very, very important. So what did it mean for staycations in Scotland in 2020? Well, just before tourism reopened in July, we asked people what their plans were. And what we discovered there was that 7% had already booked a Scottish holiday. Sorry, 9% had already booked a Scottish holiday. 7% were planning one. 37% were thinking about one. So there was a clear demand amongst Scots for taking a holiday in Scotland at some point this year. And only 47% had no intention to or didn't know. So 53% of Scots were seriously considering or planning a Scottish holiday this year. At the end of August, we asked them, well, we asked that question again, basically. And obviously this time we had a bunch of people, 13%, who'd already taken a Scottish holiday. But then when you add up those who had booked one, or those who were planning one, and those who were thinking about one, we get actually coincidentally, or maybe it reflects the fact it was a very stable position, 53% again had either taken a holiday or were planning a holiday this year. Now 53% of Scots is quite a large number. It's 2.4 million of the adult population, of the population, I should say. So potentially, it was never going to turn tourism around, but the domestic staycation market was going to make a difference. Now, of course, the big challenge for the industry at that stage was, well, at the end of August, we still have, we've only had 13% have already taken a holiday. Yeah, 10% have booked one, but still a large chunk of people who are saying they're going to take a holiday but actually haven't done so yet. How do we make sure we get these over the line? So that was a big challenge back in August. And of course, since then, it's become much more difficult for the industry, especially, September provided a bit of an opportunity, but later in the year, there's no way these numbers will obviously have come through. So amongst the 47% of Scots who decided not to take a staycation in Scotland this year, what was the reason? We wanted to know, well, was it because you decided to go overseas or whatever? Well, the main reason that came through was this desire not to go anywhere. The virus was still around. Half of them said that was their main reason for not doing it. Price, 12%. The feeling that rather than take a holiday, they would stay local and take day trips, 9%. And then I'm going to wait till next year, 2021, when things will hopefully be a bit better. And then with a whole bunch of other reasons given, fears of local outbreaks. This was just after the Aberdeen outbreak, mini shutdown in August. Going to England or Wales instead, illness, disability, wanting to go abroad, no leave left, everywhere booked. So largely the reasons for not taking holidays were around a feeling they didn't want to do it rather than a decision to go elsewhere. So when did they take those holidays, or when were these holidays planned? They said they would take them later in the year. I mean, when would they take them? Well, in August, we discovered that 9% of those who were thinking about or planning or taking a holiday or whatever, 9% of that bunch of people had taken it before the end of July. So in that 2-week period, that 2-week window, and another 9% in the first half of August, before the schools went back. And after the schools went back, another 7% had already taken a holiday. Then you had a large chunk saying they were going to take it in September, and a big chunk for October, 23%. Lower numbers towards the end of the year, as you would expect. So hopefully a lot of these holidays did happen. But you know, there's still a bit of uncertainty around that. It varied again by social class. ABC ones more likely to have taken holidays immediately or earlier. Money was maybe more available and so on. And then amongst the different life cycle groups, as you would expect, families were more likely to have taken their holidays before the schools went back. 24% of families, Scots families, had taken their holidays then. And a big chunk were planning on taking holidays during the October break. Obviously, we know by then more restrictions have come into place. The one thing that's clear also in this chart is that empty nesters were the least likely to, they were most likely to be putting it off. Now, that's Scotland's mainstay market. I know possibly less so for a lot of adventure tourism operators, but it's still a slightly, a more dampened result in terms of the willingness to take holidays this year. Where were they taking these holidays? Well, I think good news for the Highlands obviously was that the Highlands was the main destination mentioned. Now, that is usually the case in domestic tourism, but more so this year than normal. Normally there would be a much bigger proportion choosing Edinburgh or city breaks in Edinburgh, or Glasgow even, or wherever. But basically what we found this year is there was more of a desire for rural areas. The Highlands obviously top of the list, but if you look at the other areas here towards the top, Argyll and the Isles at 16%, Perthshire 13%, Ayrshire and Arran, probably as much the Arran impact as anything at 10%. Loch Lomond, Trossachs and Stirling, obviously the proximity to the central belt made that quite appealing to some. And obviously a lot of people in Aberdeen in particular would look at doing something fairly local in Aberdeenshire and Grampian in the northeast and so on. And so on and so forth. You can see the natural patterns there. Now, back in June, we asked people about the extent to which the pandemic would impact on their accommodation choice. And this is the figures on the right-hand side of this chart, the red and the green. And what we discovered back in June was that some kinds of accommodation had greater appeal now than they would have done before the pandemic. So we had a net 30% increase in the interest in taking self-catering holidays, an increase in staying with relatives at 14%, tent and canvas up 18%, staying with friends up 7%, own caravan up 18%, and generally a decrease in the desire to stay in serviced accommodation. Now, on the left-hand side, we asked people in August, well, first of all, those of you who've taken a holiday, in the middle bar there, what accommodation did you use? And 4 in 10 stayed in self-catering. And that was the most popular type of accommodation. And that's a higher proportion than would normally be the case. Sure, small hotels, large hotels, guest houses, B&Bs, room in a private home were the next ones on the list. But although these percentages are relatively large, they're smaller than they would normally be. And actually, what we've got here, we've broken it down by taken, and then the light green, booked, planned, considered. So these holidays haven't been taken yet. That's what people said they would be staying in if they took a holiday. And then you get the net at the top. In the case of small hotels, 28%. If we actually look at holidays taken in August, up to the end of August, you can see that far and away, self-catering was the most popular. Now, we also asked about activities, and this is obviously important from an adventure tourism point of view. In June, we asked people about what activities are more or less likely to consider because of COVID. And what we found then, not surprisingly at all, was there was much more of a desire to be in the outdoors than going into indoor type attractions or where there might be crowds and so on. So we saw net increases in the interest in visiting the natural outdoors, rest and relaxation, active outdoor pursuits, and towards the bottom, outdoor sports. Much, more of an interest in that than would normally be the case, and much less of an interest in things like, especially at the bottom, attending events and festivals. A lot of these events and festivals wouldn't be happening, but B, the desirability to get away from other people. Meeting and mixing with locals. Normally, a big factor of a Scottish holiday is that local welcome. much less of an appeal this year. Cultural activities, visiting purpose-built attractions, all showing less desire than normal. Now, on the left-hand side, we actually see what people said they did during their holidays in August, and that's the bars below the overall one at the top, which includes those with holidays planned. So what we see is very much reflecting this, doing something outdoors, rest and relaxation, active outdoor pursuits were the three main activities undertaken on Scots holidays this year. Now, I think a lot of that will continue on into next year, which does undoubtedly provide an opportunity for the adventure tourism sector. Very briefly, I'm just going to, in fact, I'm going to skip this slide and the next one, because I'm conscious of time, and show you the summary slide from it. We asked people what was going to be important for you on a Scottish holiday this year. And we showed them a whole bunch of I think about 16 different options. And then we asked them, those who'd taken a holiday, how satisfied they were with each of these elements on that holiday. And what we've done here is plot them. So the further to the top of the chart, the more important a feature is. The further to the bottom, the less important it is. The further to the right, the higher the levels of satisfaction amongst those who've taken that holiday with that feature. And to the left, the further, the less the satisfaction. And you can see on the left-hand side the things we talked about. So I'm just going to plot them up one by one. And what we see here is that hygiene and cleanliness, both in accommodation and in places visited generally, the attention paid to physical distancing in indoor locations, and the quality of accommodation were the four key things that were both important and which had high levels of satisfaction amongst visitors. So basically, things that were important were these key things were being delivered. So that was good news. The industry did well in delivering the things that were wanted, that were hoped for, and also the extent to which you can escape crowds of people, number 6. Negatively, I should say, element 5, which is in the red box top left, it's just in that box where people said it was important, but actually satisfaction levels were less positive than the importance should have suggested they would be. The behaviours of other visitors and tourists, and that's a very difficult thing for the industry to control. But that was a major negative that people found in a Scottish holiday this year, that they wanted to get away from people who weren't behaving the way they felt safe and secure around. There are also some hidden opportunities here. Number 12, the welcome provided by the locals in the destination. People weren't saying that was going to be important to them, but actually they were really satisfied with the welcome they got, which is great. I mean, even within all the restrictions, we were still able to deliver a strong experience. And there's a lot more on this chart you can look at your leisure at a later point. Now, I did say we wanted to get the views of communities who'd maybe shown a little bit of reticence around the idea of tourists coming to their areas. So we asked them in August how comfortable they felt about and ready for visitors to come to their area they were. So across the whole of the adult population, first of all in July, we asked it in July initially before tourism reopened. And what you see there is quite a big bit of red, where on the furthest right, extremely concerned, would prefer no visitors coming to my area yet at all. Then the next one, a number of concerns, would only want a fairly small number of more local visitors. And then as we move further to the left, more openness to the idea of people coming there, and generally a willingness for people to come from different places, but maybe ideally not so far away. They wanted the security of knowing it was maybe Scots in particular. So we saw a lot of that in July. We repeated the question in August, and things hadn't changed hugely. There was slightly less of an extreme concern at 13% than there had been in July, which maybe reflected better experiences than some people had anticipated. But equally, there was still quite a large proportion of people who had a number of concerns. And a little bit of movement towards more welcoming of visitors, but basically still a lot of concern about the idea of tourists coming to their area. And now, if we did this now, it'll be different again, obviously. And it does vary across the country. What we did find was that in the rural south, that's where the reticence was greatest. I think, being honest about it, I think there was clearly a worry about people coming from down south over the border, where they maybe felt there had been less control, if you like, around people's behaviours, and that was a worry. More so than was it the case in the rural north, especially in the Highlands, where there was more of an openness and willingness for people to come. But again, some very interesting figures there when we look at them. Final two slides I want to share with you are looking to next year, because I think this is both, I think there's a lot of positive news in this in terms of the Scottish adult population. In August, and things have changed since then, we all know, but in August, we asked people, well, what about next year? Which destinations are you likely to consider next year for holidays? And we asked them how likely they were to take a holiday in Scotland, elsewhere in the UK, somewhere in Europe, or further afield, longer haul destinations. So what we discovered for Scotland, first of all, was that 79% of Scots claimed that they were fairly likely, very likely, or definitely would take a holiday in Scotland next year. Now, realistically, the top two, the 25% very likely and the 24% definitely will, that equates to around half the population, which is roughly what we saw taking holidays this year. So that's to me suggests a desire to repeat that again next year. And the experiences were good from people. We discovered that in our survey and other surveys that have been undertaken. So people Scots took holidays at home and enjoyed them. There's more of a willingness next year to consider going further afield within the UK, but not to the same extent as staying within Scotland, obviously. Further afield in Europe, the numbers are going down, as you can see. So it's a very obvious pattern here. So the further away from home, the less the appeal. Whether that be for safety reasons or worry, or whether it's financial, there'll be all sorts of things going on in there. And it did vary by different segments. I'm not going to go through this in any detail, other than to say that, again, it's the empty nester market, Scotland's mainstay market, that is the most reticent right across all the different destination types. However, that said, there's still much more of a desire to take holidays in Scotland than other parts of the world, whether it's the UK or elsewhere. Also, interestingly, the family market remains pretty buoyant, and that's good news, because there's a lot of new, in inverted commas, Scots taking holidays with the family in Scotland that previously they would have gone elsewhere. And we asked them, well, to what extent has coronavirus had an impact on what you'll do next year compared with how you would have felt pre-COVID-19? And if there's any positives to be taken from the virus, and there's very, very few, obviously, one is that perhaps it might just give a boost to domestic tourism. Now, we know overseas tourism is another matter, but domestic tourism, and that boost looks like it will go into next year, not just this year. We see that 33% of Scots are now more likely to take a Scottish holiday next year compared to how they would have felt pre-COVID, and only 17% less likely. So a net plus 16% in favour of taking a holiday in Scotland. And that is across all different life cycle groups, but especially families, which is important, at plus 27%. And amongst those who took a Scottish holiday this year, even more so in 2020, even more so a consideration of doing it next year, which illustrates the satisfaction they got out of that holiday. And the very bottom set of bars, those who say they only took a Scottish holiday in 2020 because of the restrictions placed by COVID, were sufficiently impressed by what they got that they're more likely to consider Scotland again next year than they would have done previously. So that's very much a whistle-stop tour, I should say, of what we covered in the survey. There's obviously an awful lot in there that I've not been able to cover. Please go on our website, download the reports, see what you find interesting. Hopefully some of it might be useful for you for your planning for next year, but happy to answer questions after the next presentation. So I'll stop sharing now. There we go.
That's great. Thank you very much for that, Jim. Lots of data and lots of information in there. But I think if we'll just keep the flow going, then some questions afterwards. Peter's with us. So Peter, I'll just pass over to you and take it away for about 20 minutes or so. That'd be great. Thanks.
Hi folks, Peter Syme here, speaking from sunny Dunning in Perthshire. Just walked in the door, having been with another operator. So to give you a bit of context, over the COVID period, since March, when it started, I was in Berlin in March presenting to a conference, or should have been presenting to a conference, a few thousand tourism operators. Berlin started getting shut down at that point and all the conferences were gone. Since then, I've spoken to over 250 tour operators from various adventure and city-based tour operators in over 60 countries on one-to-one consultancy. And I've also had online, as we're all doing now, presentations to thousands of tour operators, and that brings feedback. So what I'm going to go through today is some of the challenges and the solutions that we've seen success with from some operators, and there is no good general brilliant news here, because many operators have been obliterated or more or less did no business, but there has been some success stories as well, and there's some trends coming out of them success stories that we can double down and bring advantage to going into 2021. So the first thing I want to start with is demand, and there's a lot of data coming out now, and the issue for many of us isn't demand. The demand is pent up and it wants to be released. The regulation is stopping the demand. But in every global location where demand was released, if operators managed to match the product to the market, many operators were under more demand than they could handle. But you have to drill into that a bit more. The product had to match the product that was being offered had to match the market demand. If it was correct product, demand often, particularly between the period of July and September, was exceeding the operator's capacity to deliver. Most of this demand was outdoor-based tourism product. Indoor-based tourism product, city centre tourism product suffered more. But if you had outdoor-based product, demand was released and it was exceeding capacity. Now, there's evidence coming out that as we get released into 2021, if regulations and all the stuff is released, demand could come in quite a rapid wave. That brings all sorts of challenges for operators with dealing with last minute demand to be able to maximize yield, supply, staffing, operations. But if I give you an example of my own businesses, as well as consulting, I run my own tourism businesses. For the last 10 years, our booking window was 36 days. And in August this year, it was 48 hours, 2 days. So we went from a 36-day booking window to a 48-hour booking window in one season. What that means is the overall impact of COVID to the industry has been what was happening in the industry before and trends that were happening before. COVID's acted as an accelerator and speeded up a lot of stuff that was happening before. Now, that's fundamental because that's structural changes. That doesn't mean just because we get vaccinated and everything gets back to some sort of normal, everything goes back to how it was, because it won't. If society has gone through a structural change and people have got used to doing things in a certain way, they won't go back to doing how they were doing before. So if we just take that one example there, if people are used to booking more last minute and they've got in the habit to booking more last minute, and it's become safer from a financial and a health point of view to book last minute, there's a fair chance that is going to continue. And that is going to be a structural change within the industry for a lot of operators. It certainly was for us, and it certainly caused a lot of issues that we're going to have to scale to deal with going forward. All the operators I've discussed with, when we went through their customer journey, and like I say, these operators could be anything from a city centre to a remote operator, an expedition operator, high volume operators dealing with tens of thousands of clients to operators dealing with hundreds of clients. All of their customer journeys were the same. And this hasn't changed. This is Google data. This is not our opinion. All customers are going through a dreaming phase, a planning phase, a booking phase, an experiencing of doing whatever it is you're selling to them phase, and a sharing phase. With whatever you're designing and whatever you're replanning for 2021 and onwards, you have to design around these 5 phases, because this is the data that Google is giving us, where customers are carrying out this journey online and offline. And the online-offline journey merges into one customer experience. So you have to go through the dreaming phase, planning phase, booking phase, experiencing phase, and sharing phase of your customer journey. Now, again, what COVID did to that, whereas these 5 phases could be spread pre-COVID over a long period of time, COVID condensed them and speeded them up. So the dreaming phase rapidly became the planning phase and the booking phase once July and August happened. At the moment, because we're all locked down again and there's travel restrictions in, a lot of people are in the dreaming phase, a little bit of planning, but there's not much booking going on. What does that mean as an operator? It means if you understand the phases that people are on, online and offline, you have to create your content to suit the phases, because generic content and generic marketing will not suit the customers if you're presenting the wrong stuff at the wrong time, depending what phase they're in. So you have to create content and distribution of that content to suit the customer. And remember what I've just said here, a lot of this has been condensed. And the minute these travel restrictions we've get lifted that's on the place in the moment within Scotland, a lot of this dreaming, planning and booking will suddenly happen very, very close together, whereas historically it was quite well spread out. And operators need to be ready to go with increased marketing to the minute the travel restrictions are lifted, to open up your marketing funnels more than what you probably got them at the moment, to be able to handle the dreaming, planning and booking phases of the customer journey. Everything you do around this stuff needs to be planned around the customer journey. Where do you find out how your customer journey is? Google is pretty good at releasing all this information online with regards to tourism, and they have the biggest data set. Where I've seen a lot of challenge with many operators was changing their customer profile. Many operators through the history were tied into international customers, hadn't dealt with local customers, only had some customers from some destinations. That destination was no longer available. The operators that were successful over this last year were the ones that were able to move their target customer. Easy to say, exceedingly difficult to do. And I had to do it myself with my own business. Pre-COVID, we were very group driven. 8 out of 10 bookings were all groups. We had schools, we had stag and hen groups, we had corporate groups. Everything we did, we couldn't do anymore, because even when things opened up in July and August, these groups still were not available, still not available to be booked. All our international business that we did every year wasn't available to be booked. So back in May and June, when we were locked down, we looked at what was going to be available. And that's what we have to do again for 2021 and make some assumptions on this. Which customer groups are going to be available to do your experiences and your product? We came up with the conclusion for August gone, and the summer period gone, the only groups that we were going to be able to reach and action were on were families. Now, families to us historically were a minority group. There were some trade we got, but they weren't our core business by any means. For this season pass, they became our core business because they were the group we were able to identify that could travel, wanted to do stuff, were wanting to do stuff in small groups, and they were wanting to be outside. And they were able to be reached via Google and via Facebook social marketing. So it's not just identifying who your customer group is for the coming season, it's how do you reach them once you identify who they are. And obviously through Google PPC and Facebook marketing, you can reach these customer groups. And at the present moment, the cost of reaching them is the cheapest it's been for over a decade, in many cases for over 15 years. So the cost for marketing to your target customers at the moment are exceedingly cheap compared with historical records. I would suggest, based on what we're seeing, those businesses that were, like myself, heavily exposed to international customers, I'm certainly not betting on these international customers being back this summer in any number at all. So I'm looking at rerunning, hopefully on a longer phase than the 3 months we got this year, our local marketing to local customers, with hopefully layering a layer of small amount of international over that much later in the year when they are able to come back. But I'm certainly not planning on international business in or out of Scotland, because we have businesses that go out of Scotland as well in the first 6 months. I just don't see that being a practical thing to be spending time, money, investment on when we're not clear about how the regulations are going to work. We are clear that as the vaccine gets rolled out, local business will be able to happen. So you need to identify who your local customers are. You need to identify where they are. And we've seen a huge success in 3 months this summer gone by first targeting by geography and ratios of distance around our business. So we targeted local customers within 150 miles of our business because we knew they could get to us in a day and get back again if they did not want to do overnight accommodation because of all the risks that were going on. Once we seen that the customers were much more confident about going out than we thought they were going to be, and we were starting to get the point of not being able to manage the demand, we scaled the business up, and then we started drip feeding marketing into faraway destinations. When I say far away, London, Manchester, Bristol, places where we thought we may be able to start attracting people coming up, which was critical for the business because a local customer from 150 miles radius may come and spend a day with us. But if someone's coming from London, they tend to spend 3 days to a week with us. Therefore, the revenue per booking is significantly different. We were shocked, to be honest, by how much response we got to that. We didn't expect it to be a lot. What we got was a wave, and a crashing wave of demand coming in if you could match the right product to the right customer group. When we got to actually meet these customers, so we're in the experiencing phase now, we've hut them on their dreaming, their planning, and their booking phase. When they were actually with us, I spent a lot of time speaking to them, and this is where an opportunity is. These were not our normal customers by any means, shape, or form. This was a completely new customer segment to us. These customers would normally be in Spain, Greece, Turkey. They were quite outdoorsy, but they would have been booking things in Europe, outdoorsy in Europe. They were also significantly higher spenders than our normal customer group. Now, whether that was because they live in a different part of the world that economics are wealthier, or whether it was because they were used to spending much more money on their summer holiday and they hadn't spent it, therefore they were willing to spend a lot more on a shorter Scottish break, I'm not quite sure. But the opportunity was there, as we're going to double down again this year coming. We opened up a new customer channel with new customer groups who we discovered were high spending customer groups, and they're not reliant on flights. Virtually all of these groups for the Southeast we deal with this year all drove. We had a couple that actually came by train, but the vast majority drove there. So again, that's about looking at who your market fit is, your product fit, and what geography they're in. It's not difficult to reach these, depending on who's doing your marketing, or you understand how you do your marketing yourself, because most of this marketing, be it social or Google PPC, can be driven by geography. So it's not overly difficult to do this. The other thing we've seen from operators across the world was distribution. This is where you have a product and you market it around the world on your own efforts or put it through OTAs and many partners. The companies that did best were the companies that were most direct. So the companies that had a one-to-one relationship with the customers and took most of their bookings direct, they did the best during COVID times. The companies that had the majority of their bookings coming through third parties had the worst time by a long, long way. So the lesson to learn there is who controls the transaction is in the stronger position of resilience as a business in difficult times. So I'll just say that again. Who controls the transaction has a more resilient business. That's not my opinion. That's just been proved out from the example we've seen. If you think that logically through, if you've basically outsourced all your booking to partners, distributions and to OTAs and tour operators, they control the transaction. You have a transaction with them, but they have a transaction with the customer. Therefore, they're the one legally responsible for making the decisions about cancellations. So in a difficult world that we're going to be in for the next 12 months to 24, the more direct your business is, the more resilient you, but you're not just going to make more margin because you're handling the booking. The more resilient your business is, the more you can look after the customer, and the highest satisfaction rates and reviews you're going to get from your customer. Now, that's not to say you should ignore your partners, because as the world opens up again and international opens up again, OTAs and online travel agents will really come back into their own. If they can start bringing in international customers again, you want to be hooked into these guys. So you definitely want a mix in your business of partners and direct business. But as long as the business stays local, you really need to be focusing on, when I say local, local customers, you really need to be focusing on direct marketing and controlling your own marketing. The more international opens up, the more you need to open up your pipelines with partners and with OTAs again. The OTAs have a distinct advantage over all of us, that they can see where in the world on any given moment and any given day is doing well. Therefore, they can apply their marketing efforts laser focused to whoever's open. So I'll give an example that may happen, may not happen. As we go into 2021 and our travel corridors opened up between Britain, the UK and France and Germany and Holland, the OTAs will be marketing in these countries for product in Scotland and vice versa, where it's going to be difficult as operators for us to do that straight away. So you want to keep these channels open, but in this difficult world, direct is a stronger business model than distribution through OTAs. I just want to cover some things about structural and cyclical changes. And this, I'm going to use some examples that are not exactly tour operators, but they are. I've just left a tour operator this morning and we identified a huge opportunity for them by discussing this. There's many changes happened due to COVID, and most of them are cyclical. For businesses and tourism, a lot of them are cyclical. So we've had a bad time, but travel's going to come back. It's going to come back with a vengeance, and we're going to get the business back again. But some things have gone through a structural change. These may not come back. The two examples we're going to use here is one's commercial property, which will in fact tour operators. And you're saying, what the hell's commercial property got to do with tour operators? Well, if city centre office blocks are not going to be used the same way in the past as they were historically, city centres are not going to have as many people in them as they did previously. You're not going to get as much business travel hitting city centres. So that is a structural change. That's not a bounce back change. That is an industry structural change. Many, many corporate companies have learned to put millions of dollars of extra profit to the bottom line because their staff are not traveling all over the world anymore. They're using all these online solutions. That's not going to suddenly jump back to having all the staff traveling all over the world and again when they can. This is a structural change to that industry. Commercial property is under a structural change. So when you're looking at the changes that's impacting tourism at the moment, always ask yourself two questions. Is this structural or is it cyclical? Because if it's bouncing back and you believe it's in a cycle, that means you're going to invest in it big style when you're trying to catch a wave and you're trying to catch the trend, because when it does come back, if it's a structural change, you've got to ask yourself a lot more questions, because that means the tide has gone out, and the tide, when it comes back in, is not going to reach the previous high point. Therefore, you have to make very different business decisions about anything that's undergoing a structural change. When we're on the discussion here of trends, something that shocked me, speaking to so many operators this year, was the complete lack of use of Google Trends. Google Trends is a free product that Google provides everybody. You just tap in Google Trends, it comes up there. It's fairly self-explanatory how to work, or go to YouTube and tap in Google Trends and watch a video on how to use it. Google Trends is basically Google telling you and everybody else what is happening in the world from intent, from people searching. Now, in tourism, you want to be at the front of a trend. You don't want to be at the back of a trend. Therefore, you need to be using Google Trends, certainly on a weekly basis, to track your products and your services that you sell, to see what's happening with these trends. Now, at the moment, across all tourism, you can see high demand in the dreaming phase. So lots of people are looking, and the trends back this out, but they're not booking. But they're looking. Therefore, if they're looking, you need to be taking action to make sure you can capture that look. So when they do get to planning and booking, you can action on that. So if there's a product that you want to have sitting on your desktop all the time and use it once a week or once a fortnight, Google Trends, because at the moment, historical trends have all shot to bits. They're all over the place. And businesses, well, I've got 20 years worth of data for my business, right, which I use quite well to maximize my business. That data for 2021 is not relevant. If 2021 was going to be normal, it would be very relevant. But all them years of data isn't relevant anymore because I've now got different customer groups coming from different locations, planning and booking their businesses at a different time frame from they've done from the last 15 years. Therefore, I'm collecting new data and new information and new trends to be able to maximize my business. Now that's hard, and the only way you can do that is by identifying some of the trends that Google's telling you happening. You all know what your products are, your services are. Tap it in and find out the trends in there, and you will see some really crazy spikes or dips during the COVID period. You've got to look past that and say, look at, and it does give some forecasting on what's coming up, what hit views is coming up at the moment, and some of the forecasts are quite powerful. And they're going to be good news for many tourism operators because it reinforces what most of us know is there is no issue with demand if the demand can be released.
Peter, could we just maybe begin to draw a close?
Sure.
I could listen to you all afternoon, but we've got some other things to cover. That'd be great. Thanks.
We'll just quickly summarise what I see as the most biggest opportunities for operators here. Everything you do on your wall, on your computer, have the phases of a customer journey written down. See it every day until it's off the top of your head. Dreaming, planning, booking, experiencing, and sharing. Understand that customer journey, and everything you create for your business, base it around that customer journey. If you do that and do it consistently for a year, you will transform your business. Because all you're basically doing is building your business around the customer. And that's a bugbear of mine. Most operators build their business around their own needs, wants, and what they perceive as their business needs. The minute you transfer your business to building around the customer, you will see a significant uplift in the performance of your business. It's hard to do because it goes against everything natural that you think. But if you build your business around the customer, you will see an uplift. The way to do it is use that simple journey that Google gives us: dreaming, planning, booking, experience, and sharing. Second point in the summary, there's going to be no issue with demand. If the demand is released, you're going to get demand. So start thinking about how you're going to be able to manage the demand, especially if you're an outdoor operator. If you're a big indoor operator with people close together, you've maybe got some other issues. But if you're an outdoor operator, there's no issue with demand. International versus local, you're going to have to make a shout on this about where you're going to invest. I, for one, am leaving my international investment for the second part of 2021 to see where the landscape lies. And I'm focusing, doubling down on local. You have to decide what local is for your business because it will be different for all of us. For me, I have phase one local, 150-mile-an-hour radius, and then I have the rest of what I call local, which is the whole of the UK. Final point. Just remember, direct, as we all get into these platforms and more business comes from platforms, just remember, whoever controls the transaction has the most resilient model, right? If you subcontract all of your bookings, you don't have a resilient business. You're an Uber driver, or you're an Uber driver just pretending to be a tour operator. Okay.
That's brilliant, Peter. As I said before, I could just Peter talked so many topics that comes out with resonates with my time in hotels, especially when he gets on to talking about yield and margins. I just love it. There are a few questions come in there. I think Fergus is going to just run through those.
Question for you, Jim, that came in, hang on a sec, from Nick. I think you had a question about caravans and camper vans.
Yeah, I see the question. Does own caravan include camper van? I mean, it was up to the respondent to define. I think absolutely people are going to lump camper van in there with own caravan, undoubtedly. I'm pretty sure that's the answer.
Okay, and then we had one, I think, from Seb, which is a good question in terms of the data, in terms of the stats for 21. Did that assume the recent investments in the back?
Yeah, that's a great question, whether or not the vaccine was in place. This was done back in late August, and obviously that was quite some time before we had any good news on vaccines. So we didn't mention vaccines one way or another in the question. Now, one thing I should have said in the presentation, so the answer is it doesn't assume either. But one thing I should have said as part of my presentation is we are going to do another wave of this research in January, because things have moved on considerably over the last few months. And as we know, on a weekly basis, things are changing at the moment with coronavirus. And obviously, we've got Brexit to factor in as well. There's lots of things happening that are impacting on how people feel about holidays. So we are keen to go back out in late January and ask people about their holiday plans for 2021 and what's impacting that and what might make a difference and so on. So hopefully it'll be very interesting to compare. We'll be repeating some of these questions we asked back in August then.
Okay, Jim. There's a question in from Aileen, which I think is good as well, regarding obviously the data we've got presented here very much shows a Scottish picture. Yeah. And I don't know, there's just a question around, is there anything on a UK-wide basis? Yes.
There is, not quite the same. It's a different survey, obviously, but the National Tourist Board started doing a survey in, I think, around about June, a sort of monthly. I think initially it was fortnightly survey right across the UK, asking people about their UK domestic holiday plans. It was less around how people felt and their opinions and views and so on that ours was. So it complemented it quite nicely. More around actual behaviour. So where were they considering? What had they done? Where, what accommodation did they use, and so on. And that survey has been going on. It's been monthly, I think, since around September, and it will continue to the end of this year. So there is data out there, and it covers all of the UK, but it's a relatively small sample for Scotland. But if you go on the Visit Scotland website and the Insights pages, it's all freely available there. So it's definitely well worth a look.
Sorry, was that the National Tourist Boards in England that are doing this? Yeah.
No, Visit Scotland. Visit Scotland, Visit Wales, and Visit England.
Right.
Yeah, it's a joint survey, and Visit Scotland are publishing the results on their website at a Scottish level. Yeah.
We'll pull that data out because we're going to set up on the project website a research page. So where we've got all the presentations, but we'll set up a separate page where a lot of that research information is. So we'll be able to let you know when we've got it, and you'll be able to go there instead of trying to trawl the web to find the information. And
I'll put it in the chat room now. Actually, I can find it quite quickly, so I'll put it in the chat room now. That'll save.
Thanks, Jim. And the other thing is, Aileen, you were asking about Peter's presentation and slides. I mean, Peter's presents a lot, but especially the Google Dream Experience module we've got access to some of that information, so we'll be able, I've got a couple of, I've used it before in presentations, so we'll be able to put that up and send that through to you to help you understand that where that is. Any other questions?
Yeah, there's a question from Carol. This is probably more for you, Peter, in respect of Google Trends. Probably great if you know what to search for. How do we know what to search for if we are to maximise the results? I suppose that's just a technical question about the using of Google Trends.
I mean, the best thing's to watch the video, but you need to know who your customer is. And obviously, sometimes we have the past customer and today's customer. Like I said, it can be different due to COVID. But you need to know who your customer is and what products you've got. So your first phase is you're going to search the trends on your existing products and what you're doing historically to see what's happened in trends against your historic products and services you've been doing. So you get a baseline of what's happening. Then before you launch any new products or any new services that you think may be suitable for this world, then you go to Google Trends and tap that in and find out if there is a demand. So you're planning for the market as it is, rather than planning on what you think will be good for this market. You need to plan for what the market is allowing you to do in these times, not what you think would be a good thing to do.
Okay. Actually what we can do is there's a lot of digital workshops that Visit Scotland are running and looking at, and some of these are just quite easy and simple to access ones. We'll explore that with Visit Scotland to see if they have something specifically on Google Trends or Google Analytics, and we can see maybe get that done as a separate workshop or as a separate breakfast briefing or something like that. So we'll explore that for you guys to try and find out and give you information to that. I think that's all the questions that we've got just now. Yeah.
One quick other point, Stuart. I've put another link in the chat room, which is really useful, I think. Some of you have probably seen it already. The Scottish Tourism Emergency Response Group produced a really interesting scenarios booklet a couple of weeks ago. And it's available on the Visit Scotland website on that link. And it literally looks at, well, none of us really know what 2021 is going to look like. I happen to share Peter's views on it. Very, very closely matches our data in terms of where it's probably likely to go. But it basically looks at about 5 or 6 different scenarios for tourism businesses. And you're encouraged as a business to answer a few questions. If this happens, what would be your actions around marketing, around all sorts of different questions around operating a business, so that although none of us can know exactly where things are going, as we know, things change so quickly at the moment that if we go into 2021 and things are going down one path and then suddenly things change, you've got the chances are that scenario will be covered and you've got a little bit of a pathway that you can maneuver yourself through. It's well worth looking at. It's a framework really for businesses to use.
Okay, thanks for that, Jim. Peter, Jim, really appreciate your time. Happy to stay on board or go and catch a coffee or something else. Are you still in tier 1 or tier 2? What are you in now, Jim?
I'm now in tier 1. I'm in the borders, but of course we're surrounded by tier 3, so we can't go anywhere other than the borders. But it's progress, isn't it, at the end of the day? And it's the only good thing.
Okay, so thanks, Jim. Thanks, Peter. I'm just going to move on. I'm just going to take us back into share the screen and carry on with the second half of the presentation that's there. So you should be. Yeah, is it coming up?
Yeah.
It's actually not going full screen. Let's try.
No, that's not very good.
It should do. What we're moving on to this stage is what Peter was talking a lot about, is about understanding and knowing your customers. And that's something that we want to, we're going to go through over the next 5 or 10 minutes. And the message coming across loud and clear that the GB market is going to be the strong market for tourism in 2021. It always was the strong market for Scotland. So we're just going to use some of the data from 2019 to show where the markets were coming from and what the types of things we were looking for. So that's what I'm going to be covering as we go through this. As Peter was talking about understanding and knowing your customer, it's to my view, it's a virtuous circle. That's the diagram on the left. It's a bit small on screen, and I can't get it to bigger screen, folks. I'm sorry. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, there. Oh. I need to go and share that again. Sorry, folks. There we go. That's up on full screen. There, that's better. Understanding who your customers are, where your markets are, allows you to tailor your product to meet their needs, expectations, and preferences. Especially for 2021, if you're moving into new markets or new customers that are coming, you need to make the fleet-footed and tailor those. It makes it clear on what your marketing activities are going to be and where your most appropriate target markets are, so that you can get the best return on that marketing investment. So if you understand your customers, you can develop your product experiences to meet those customer needs, to target your market, to review your marketing activity and customer feedback, which means you understand your customers and you can continue to develop your products as they go. Why is this not moving? If we take a helicopter view, we heard a couple of weeks ago from Chris about Visit Scotland, and we heard 4 weeks ago from Gergana about the global picture. It's just in terms of Scottish tourism and where Scottish tourism comes from, 80% of Scottish tourism in 2019 came from the UK market, came from the GB. So 44% Scotland, 34% England, 2% Wales and Northern Ireland, and 20% was international. That's the number of visits, and the number of nights is the bullet points on the lower left-hand side. So if we're looking at 2021, that trend is still going to continue. That's where the market is going to be coming from. The Highlands, very similar picture. to Scotland, albeit that there will be geographical nuggets. So Skye gets more international visitors, but 43% of Highlands tourism came from Scotland, 34% was the rest of GB, and then 13% Europe, 7% North America, and 3% the rest of the world. So still, the Highlands, a lot of business is coming from the UK market. If you look at the UK market in 2019, what was the most visited regions? Well, the Highlands came second to Edinburgh and the Lothians. Well, actually, it's Edinburgh that gets the lion's share of the GB market. That's coming from all of the UK. Highlands is still sitting in second place at 20.3%. Where are those visitors coming from? Scotland being the main market, London and south east of England being circa 11%. Although if you take the north of England, so take northwest and northeast of England, that's almost up at 15%. So those you can begin to help you identify where and which markets you want to go for to attract to your business and get customers to you. Seasonality, 58% is the main season, 42% is off season. So that's showing there's almost the seasons being extended almost as year on year. I remember when I came back to Scotland in the 80s, you know, we were in Edinburgh, we were on a 5-month season. Now Edinburgh's a 12-month of year-round destination. That's happening more and more in Scotland. So there are more opportunities for you to attract visitors on those shoulder months. Visit Scotland do a snapshot of the life stages, and that sort of identifies Jim's points about empty nesters. Empty nesters have got the lion's share of the overnight trips in Scotland. That's the 55 plus. Then families coming second, and older independents were third. So all of the stuff that Jim's talking about there and the markets and COVID were the same as the markets were in 2019 for Scotland. If you then just take it as a Scotland market snapshot and we take the volume and value of tourism in Scotland, most visited region in Scotland is the Highlands. Again, that's identified within Jim's research that he's taken with the consumers. So visitors, Scottish tourism heads to the Highlands, and generally it's a short break that they're going on. It's 1 to 7 nights that they're looking at for, and they're motivated by Syrian landscape, closeness to home, and to get away from it all. And that raises that closeness to home, that identifies Peter's viewpoint. He's identified his target market, target audience for 2021, which is 150 miles away, and he's beginning to drill down into who that is. Thanks for sending in the market segmentation information that you gave us. And this is just a summary of the results. It's not percentages or anything, but what it's showing is that it's reflecting the market that Scotland has been getting and Scotland will be getting, is that Scotland, the rest of the UK, and North America as being the primary markets. North America being the main international visitor market for Scotland, and then a swathe across Europe. So a very similar pattern. So it's not as if any of you guys are a left base. Some of you are getting more international business. Others you're dependent on totally in Scotland, but most of you are that mix of that, the UK being your main markets. Interesting thing is, well, the information that you send through, independent travellers, couples and families are the market share that you're getting to your businesses. So that's all good and positive. And to bring it into the sort of the generational things, it's the baby boomers, the Generation X, and the millennials that are your main markets that you're coming into there. So that's all. History tells us a lot of things, but your information that you're sending through mirrors in terms of the way the marketplace is going and beginning to move. If you want to begin to really drill down to who is your ideal customer, and we've got a little exercise that we can do another time, is what do you want from your ideal customer? Well, actually, you want an ideal customer that will spend with you, come regularly, and doesn't cause you any grief. But Visit Scotland have done some market segmentation And those are the 6 segments they identified. The one at the bottom, bus seekers, is one they introduced last year. The 3 primary ones for adventure tourism are adventure seekers, bus seekers, and natural advocates. If you haven't looked at that information, it's useful to have, because what it does give you is their likes, their dislikes, what accommodation they stay in, their length of stay, the media that they read. So it begins to help you understand your customers so that you can begin to look to maximize your marketing and the spend that you put into marketing as you go. So what does that mean for your business in 2021? Are your products and experiences fit for purpose? Are they right for the marketplace? Are they right for the GB market? Or are you going to have to fine tune them? Does that mean that your proposition is right? Are your margins right? Is your pricing right? Or does, as Peter said, he switched to the family market. He adjusted his pricing, but making sure he was getting the right markets. A couple of weeks ago, when we did we asked you about how many of you had online booking. It was about 55 had, 45 hadn't. If you haven't got online booking on your website, Peter talked about direct business, direct bookings coming. Make sure you've got that feature on your site. Start looking to plan that. Have a book now. If you've got online booking, that's fantastic, but make sure you've got a book now button or feature right up front on your website so the consumer can see that. Start to think about who you should be collaborating with. Who is it that's out there? Who do you want to work with? Who do you want to pull things together? Jim identified that through COVID, the Scottish market was looking a lot more self-catering. So are there two or three self-catering operators that you could begin to work with to begin to have your product featured on their website, their products featured on your website, so that you're getting more into that collaboration and making it easier for the consumer to book? Peter talked about the OTAs, and I agree with him. The OTAs, are a great source of business, but if you can get business to you directly, that's fine. But make sure you've got a distribution plan ready to kick in when you want to look at it. And the next workshops, the workshop in January, we'll be talking a lot more digital, and we'll be going into much more of that in detail. And the key thing is that, we've been picking out in all of the presentations, it's about going digital, but having data. And a good social media content plan you need to have that in place, especially if you're going to move to either Google Ads or Facebook advertising. You need to have that planned, or Instagram, and we'll begin to look at that and saying, what are the platforms that each of the segments or each of the lifestyles use? The baby boomers tend to use Google and Facebook as their platforms, but my kids' generation don't use that. They tend to use Instagram or even TikTok or Snapchat. So those are the things we want you to be thinking about for your business in 2021. And Fergus is just going to now talk about the business improvement plan and some of the next stages that we're moving on to.
Thanks, Stuart. Yeah, I think, this is sort of coming together as the first, what would have been one day as a workshop in terms of just setting the scene about customers and markets. And obviously one of the things we've been talking to you about is obviously just starting to look at the areas within your business, what you want to make, the specific actions that you need to do to align yourselves for A, as a business, and B, for your customers for next year and ongoing years. For the people who have started to filter back some information, I appreciate that, because I know you're all busy in terms of business plans and outline strategy you've got, and we're starting to work together on the plans themselves. Just as a slight aside on the digital aspects of things, we've had, I think at close of play today, we'll have had all the GDPR compliance completed from everybody. So thanks again for getting that email back to Visit Scotland. And I know that some of the digital audits have started to take place, and they should be getting fed back to you individually, and they'll get fed back to ourselves, because what we want to do is link them back to the the business improvement plan itself in terms of digital activities that you need to focus on. I think in terms of setting the scene, the big things we're picking up here are just that the dynamics definitely changing in terms of the consumer, which is in terms of the demand for next year and the opportunity. So I think, you know, if you can all start to really just, if you've not done so, start mapping out some of the areas within your business that you feel require specific actions. And if you can start maybe doing that between now and the next workshop, there's headings in there that just cover your main sort of aspects of your business, and there's a catch-all at the bottom. And what we're planning to do in terms of the feedback we've had from the first two sessions, we're going to have a more participative group discussion. We will put you into groups again, and we'll start talking about your own specific individual plans and individual opportunities and challenges. And from that, hopefully we start to get some collaboration. Myself and Fraser will follow up with you just to sort of make sure that you're clear about what needs to be done. We'll probably just send you this template so that we're now really getting into the guts of what you need to be doing within your business, and we'll be obviously reflecting that in the future workshops. We get into the detail of digital and data, and we get into the detail of OTAs and the environment, etc. So that's all I really want to say in that at the moment. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. I noticed on the chat that there was a lot of questions going around about different software and different things to be able to use. I sat on a webinar this morning for an hour on Travel Tech for Scotland. Have any of you come across Travel Tech for Scotland? Have you seen that's out there? It's a new initiative that started about 6 months ago, and it's about developing technology for travel and tourism in Scotland. They started off with a toolkit about June, I think it was launched, and that was just a PDF. It's now moved on and progressed quite quickly to the Travel Tech Directory. I will send the link, but if you just Google Airtable, which is the platform they use, Travel Tech Directory, that has all of the technology suppliers that are located or providing a service within Scotland for tourism. There's about 160 there, and many of them are there already. I think Fair Harbour's on there, and a couple of the other accommodation booking sites. So I saw some of you were beginning to think about which ones to use. I think someone was talking about Woo, others are talking about WordPress for building websites. That's a really useful resource that's available for you guys to be able to tap into, and actually then gives you an overview. You don't need to spend hours trawling the web. You can actually find the information there and then, and easy to get to. That's really, I think, us for today. As Fergus said, in January we've got a digital workshop in January, which we've got Visit Scotland giving an overview of digital tourism and opportunities, and then we've got Chris Torres from the Tourism Marketing Agency. He's written a book called Lookers to Bookers. They have activity tourism operators worldwide, and Chris has just launched another platform for activity operators to promote their products called Curiosity. So that's where they're coming on to. The following workshop will be on data and beginning to how you can begin to use data in your business to maximize that and capture the information that you need. You're capturing data already. Sometimes you don't realize what data you have available, how you can begin to use it. So that's more or less us for today. I appreciate your time. Happy to take any questions or anything else that's coming out from there. Silence is golden. Yeah. Well, if there's no questions or anything's there, again, all the presentations will be put up onto the website tomorrow. I'll also pull out the information that Peter was referring to about the Google Dream Experience, Dream Planning Experience Share phase, the five steps in the customer journey, and a couple of other, I think, stuff that Peter was referring to. We'll be able to put that up online for you to access. But if we don't speak to you beforehand, have a great Christmas and New Year. We're still in lockdown 3 here, so I still can't go for a nice meal and a drink, whereas all of the others you can. So again, thanks very much, everyone.